What would you tell to someone who's maybe can't dream really right now?
The risk with dreaming is disappointment. First thing I would want to do is speak hope and say, well, the story's not over.
Come on.
The story is still unfolding. And maybe the dream wasn't truly what we wanted. It's about getting at the deepest desires, the deepest ambitions. I've got something that nobody else has. Now, some days I believe that and some days I don't. And that's the doing the inner work.
Welcome back to the Brave Wisdom Podcast, where courage fuels radical focus and wisdom cuts through the lies. Today's guest is Benji Poffenroth, and he has lived a life marked by adventure, transformation, and relentless pursuit of purpose. So let me tell you, you're going to enjoy this conversation. Benji grew up as a missionary kid in Austria. He traveled to over 50 countries, which is, I think we could spend hours just talking about all those experiences. But he leads nonprofits. He's managed high growth businesses. He now guides leaders, and even myself, because we've had some incredible transforming conversations. Benji guides them to clarity and transformation. And he's wrestled, really, that's what I love about this man. He's wrestled with the deep questions of identity, calling, and focus in the age of distraction. Hey, man, we are in an age of chaos. And Benji, I'm so very excited. You've been on the calendar for a couple of weeks, and it's like I am eyeing this day, and I can't wait for our conversation. Welcome to Brave Wisdom, my friend.
Brett, great to be with you, man. Thanks for having me.
You bet, man. We're going to jump right in because I know people are going to be really interested in what you have to say. Benji, you've traveled over 50 countries, lived in different cultures, and had a diverse life. I know from reading about you more too, and you mentioned an epiphany you had in Calcutta, India. Something about where you realize where your desires could, if they're submitted to God, can take you, so deep. And so I've been anxious to ask, can you take us back to that moment and share how that shaped your path forward?
Yeah. So the backstory is I had grown up with a perspective of God, and I hadn't really made it my own. But the perspective I had been raised in was a limited one. And I thank my parents for what they did. They raised me in a Catholic nation in Austria. They were there to reach people because there's cultural Muslims and practicing Muslims. There's practicing Catholics and cultural Catholics. And by and large, a lot of the Catholicism that we saw in Austria was cultural Catholics. To be Austrian was to be Catholic at that time. And that's has changed now since we've moved away pretty significantly, especially with younger people. But that's kind of the framework that I was coming from growing up. And here they are to reach Catholics in this country, and their experience of God was what they'd experienced. And I took a lot of those experiences with me into my life. And I had a very profound experience at 21 where I had challenged God to see if he was real. I need to know for myself. This was fresh off of a 6-month backpacking trip going through Central America and South America, a little bit of the Caribbean, and came off of that trip and thinking, there's got to be more to life. I've come. This is an amazing high that I was coming off of, and I felt pretty low pretty shortly after that. And we'd have these long discussions on this trip. My best friend had joined me for half of that trip for about 3 months, going through the 8 countries in Central America, from Panama up to Mexico. And often late at night, we'd have these discussions after we'd been finished partying and doing our thing. What's the deal with God? This thing that we were raised in, is he real? Is he not? We both came back from that trip determined to find out if he's real.
Wow.
And both of us, within about 2 months of returning from that trip, had pretty dramatic encounters that was not typical to what we've been raised in, where God seemed to really answer that. But what happened shortly afterwards is I started to live from a place that it was interpreting my experiences, as we all do, through my nature and my nurture, the way I'd been hardwired and the way I'd been raised. And very quickly started to perceive that I felt like I need to pay God back somehow for all that I had done, and didn't have a very good understanding of grace. Mm-hmm. Within 2 years of that experience, I decided to get involved with Youth with a Mission. And as a part of this nonprofit, you take 3 months of classes and then very quickly go overseas to go serve people overseas. And I went into this experience thinking, where's the hardest place you guys go? Because what really had stood out for me from my last couple of years in my pursuit of God is it seemed like there was a lot of suffering. That was a byproduct, and it was just what happens when you follow Jesus. But also almost this idea of penance. Maybe I picked it up from Catholicism. I'm not sure why, but this idea of penance, almost that I had to pay back somehow. And that was my perspective going into this trip to India. I said, where's the hardest place you guys go? Because I'm going to go to the hardest place. I'm going to go suffer for God, suffer for Jesus. I heard that they were going to go work with the Home of the Dying and Destitute in Calcutta that Mother Teresa had established. And she had established several homes. She was no longer alive by the time we went there. But here we are, we're seeing by far the most severe poverty that I'd ever seen. I'd never seen this many illnesses exposed. In Calcutta, it seemed like if you had something wrong with you, you had a physical ailment, you wanted to show it off to try and get any kind of pity.
Wow.
The idea of professional beggars, people maiming their own children in order to get more pity. So that, as professional beggars, just horrible, horrible situations. And on a scale I just had never seen before. And then working in the Home of the Dying and Destitute, the whole purpose of the home was to give people dignity in their last hours, to go onto the street, bring those people off the street, put them in a home, clean them up, and give them dignity in their dying breath, and do it over and over and over again. And that's the context that I'm in, doing these things all day long. But as I'm doing these activities and dealing with all this poverty and this overwhelming grief for a lot of people, I had this predominant thing that wouldn't stop in my mind, which was Europe. I couldn't stop thinking about Europe, and in particular the Mediterranean. I really wanted to go backpack the Mediterranean and not go on some service, a trip of service. This was to Rome to explore. And as those desires came to mind, I started thinking, this is not good. It's like the angel and the demon. Yeah. I'm like, this is the demon on one of the shoulders here, talking to me, trying to get me distracted from the service that I'm here to do in India, distract me from the suffering. And it's almost like this bohemian lifestyle, just going to Rome, like a Jack Kerouac on the road kind of situation is what I have been picturing in Europe. And I just kept putting it off, thinking this is the devil that's tempting me to try to get me off track. And one day, clear as a bell, it was like an epiphany. It just clicked that this desire was not of the enemy. That this desire was actually something I was meant to pursue.
Wow.
That this desire was something I should go for. And so there I am in Calcutta thinking, I think this is something I'm supposed to do. I'm not just allowed to do, I'm meant to go and do this. And what it led to is me buying a guidebook and just starting to read about Europe again and places I wanted to go explore in my free time in the evenings. I'd be reading about this, juxtaposed to this dramatic poverty that I'm working in all day long, and then thinking about traveling in Europe all evening and researching which places I wanted to go, looking at maps mostly, just reading up on places on where I wanted to explore. And of course thinking, well, how am I going to go do this? Because I'd spent all my money on this discipleship training school to go to India. And I thought, well, in the past I drilled for oil. So I guess that's what I'll have to go do. It's a dirty job. It's not fun. Some days you're working 16, 18, 20-hour days. And I'm like, I could go do that to go make quick money. And again, so clearly it just came to me. It was this epiphany of, why not go try something you've always wanted to go do to earn money, to then go on this trip, then go drill for oil. And so I came away from that trip to India, from those 2 months in Calcutta, knowing I'm meant to go to Europe. I'm going to go try this out, and I'm going to do this in a way that earn money in a way that I never had before, and something I've longed to do. I believe it was a dream that was inside of me, and that was yachts, the idea of boats. I've always thought
Really?
the idea of working on a boat would be amazing. And within 2 weeks, I bought a one-way ticket down to Fort Lauderdale. I heard there's a lot of boats in Fort Lauderdale,
Yeah.
and try to get it on a yacht and have a dream job and earn money to do that, to go to Europe. And fast forward 4 months later, I'd worked 2 months in Fort Lauderdale, 2 months in the Bahamas, and that was my earnings to go to Europe and meet my brother. So,
man, I love the adventurous spirit that you have. I think that's what I'm picking up on. And I heard recently that's like life is an adventure. That's literally what life is. And so often we don't see it as this. And, I'll take it to here because the first time I met you, you reached out to me after our arena call. We were both in the arena with Erwin McManus, an incredible learning community that I've grown so much to love and enjoy. Every week we get together and have calls and discussions. But the moment we got on the Zoom call, you defined and you asked me about my identity, and I kind of stopped myself you stopped me in my tracks, and I'm like, I know all the things I do, and then you're asking me about who does God say you are, and you told me that you defined your identity, or God has defined you and calls you by name, the unstoppable, liberating dreamer. And if you're listening, you already see that. And I just absolutely loved it. And I'll tell you, I've already been wrestling with it the last few weeks since we've talked. I read the book you recommended, Living Fearless by
Living Fearless.
Jamie Wineship or Wine.
Jimmy Winship. Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible book. He's an incredible book. Definitely go check it out. But your name, can you break it down for us? What does it mean? And how did you come to own that as your identity?
It's been an amazing journey of discovery. I spent the majority of my life exploring the outer terrain, the outer universe. What's to see out in this world? And there's so much left to see, and I've got a lot left I want to do and explore. But it's been only in the last couple of years I've started to dive into an inward journey of discovery of self. And as I've done that, I've really been exposed to something much, much deeper in some ways. And I was exposed to the idea of second half of life spirituality, and thinking through the idea that there's a whole new way of living in a way that I hadn't tapped into before. And what started me along this road is I got to a point in my career where I said, what I'm doing actually really, it's soul sucking. I was making the most money by far I'd ever made, and yet it was coming at a pretty high cost. And that's that I largely felt lifeless in a lot of ways. And I got to the point where I said, okay, I was in sales, leading a sales team, selling solar panels here in California. And it had set us up in an amazing spot where we live here in Santa Barbara. But I think it served its purpose, and I knew this wouldn't be a long-term gig anyways. And so after 5 years, I think I was like, this is the time. I'm going to leave this position, and I'm meant to go and pursue something that I've always wanted to do. It was the next dream, the next iteration.
Yeah.
And that was what I call Wilder Pursuits. It's a dream fulfillment company, helping people figure out what their dream is, which starts by finding out who you are, what you want, and how to get there. And that's made me dive into a further journey in the last year and a half into who I am. Because that's what we started talking about, is asking you, Brett, well, who do you say you are? Can be a really powerful question to see what people come up with and how clear people are.
Yeah.
And I had some clarity on this, but I had never been as clear. I've never gotten as clear as this past year on who I believe I am and how would I answer that question. Who am I? And the journey took me many different ways, but the culmination of that was this book that I read by Jamie Winship, and taking on this discovery of the idea of God naming you and God speaking over you. We see this in the Bible, people getting renamed and God naming, and him saying, I call you by name, and recognizing God's voice. And so through this process of this past year, and one, asking God to speak this over me, taking time, deliberate time to voice out loud, God, who do you say I am? And then waiting in silence to see what would come to mind was the first part, doing that several times. But almost the scarier part then was then sharing what I thought was coming to mind with others. At first, I didn't even want to share this with my own spouse, with my own wife, the person I trust the most, because I'm like, this sounds kind of ridiculous. And that I would be this person. This is a little bit outlandish, because what came to mind very quickly was this idea of unstoppable, liberating dreamer.
Yeah.
And Jamie goes on to describe this process of, as you get these things, to dive into the Bible and into people, to go read about these things, these different themes. And the first theme, unstoppable, I mean, this has been a theme right since the beginning of our marriage, where my wife heard me talking about this idea and inscribed this into my wedding ring without me asking her to do this, where she said, she put in there, anything is possible.
That's
that
beautiful.
captures that same idea of unstoppable. So this has been a theme going way back. The idea of liberation. When I was 19 years old, I got exposed to the civil rights movement. Just in an English class, we were asked to read a book, we were asked to read a book, and the book that I ended up reading was Malcolm X, his autobiography. To this day, one of the greatest stories I've ever read, Malcolm X's autobiography. And exposed me to the idea of someone that was fighting for liberation in a very, very profound way. And I look back on that and say, that's been a theme of my life. I've always been drawn to people that have not been liberated, people that are underdogs, people that are bound in different ways, and have been drawn to that. When I look at things that I'm intrigued by and interested in reading about, people groups.
Yeah.
And the idea of dreaming. You ask my siblings, you ask my wife, you ask my friends, that's largely how I've lived my life, is the idea of the pursuit of dreams. Since that epiphany in Calcutta, that my desires could actually be a guiding force, and they're not all evil. God can actually use my submitted desires to shape my life, to craft a future. And it's got me really, really excited about what that could look like in other people's lives. And so when I mentioned this to my wife, I said, tell me what you think of this, but I get the sense that God is calling me unstoppable, liberating dreamer. And instantly she said, oh yeah, that totally is you. I was like, really? She's like, oh yeah. And then I started to tell this to other people, close friends of mine. And they would say the same thing. Oh, that absolutely sounds like you. So the idea of not only that God speaks it over us, but that's affirmed by people close to us. Identity is spoken by God, but also by other people.
Yeah.
Other people affirm and speak identity over us.
Yeah.
And then we get to choose to speak it over ourselves.
Yeah.
That when it becomes really profound, stepping into it and accepting that this is who I am, and now I want to live from this place.
And Benji, man, I had, as you were talking, I had this observation of I have only had a few conversations with you, right? But for whatever reason, it feels like I've known you a lot longer than a couple of weeks. And it may have to do with you just, you let me know you right off the bat. You said, Brett, on the first Zoom call, we had never talked before. You just said, I'm an unstoppable, liberating dreamer. And my heart leaped. And I'll be honest, there's a lot there, and I'm not going to use the podcast for my therapy right now. I'm in therapy. I have someone professional to help me with that, and I'll bring it back to the show when I'm able to share it without tearing up. But the point that I would bring right now that resonates most deeply with me, and probably a lot of people talking, and maybe you can even talk more into it, is there's so many people who've stopped dreaming. Maybe and in ministry especially. That's where I come from. I know a lot of people that listen, a lot of people my age too. I'm turning 42, and I'm finding, man, there's a lot of us that were in ministry but are no longer in ministry. And a lot of that has to do with their dreams were crushed, or disappointment or failure even for many people. Can you speak into that, like as an unstoppable, well, this is an incredible combination, liberating dreamer? What would you tell to someone who's maybe can't dream really right now?
Man, that's a really difficult place to be. The risk with dreaming is disappointment. That's the
Yeah.
risk. Is that if we set our sights on something and want to dream big, and then for whatever reason it doesn't turn out the way we thought, that there's there can be massive disappointment.
Yeah.
My first thought is that obviously it can lead to a place of being hopeless,
Mm,
and that's where first thing I would want to do is speak hope and say, well, the story's not over.
come on.
The story is still unfolding. But in order to be able to dream, I believe there's an inner work that has to happen. We got to dive in, and maybe the dream wasn't truly what we wanted. It's about getting at the deepest desires, the deepest ambitions. And sometimes we look, especially in this day and age, where we have access to so many more people in the world. We used to only be able to compare our lives to the people around us that we saw in person, maybe some people on TV or people that we read about. Now there's thousands of people that we
Yeah.
can compare ourselves to within a week,
Yeah.
easily. Thousands of people that we're looking at as we scroll through this online world, which can be devastating to see this many people seemingly in pursuit or living this grand life. It can be so demoralizing. But I want to go back to how the article that you used, because I was using the exact same article when I was describing my identity. That I am an unstoppable, liberating dreamer.
Okay.
And I even wrote it as that. And probably within 2 or 3 months, I had to correct it. I had to cross it out and write the, not N.
Wow.
N implies that I am one of several, that there's more of me.
That's
There's
good.
more unstoppable, liberating dreamers. And I started to come to the conclusion, no, that there was a correction started to happen as I thought about this. I'm one of one. There is no other unstoppable, liberating dreamer. Of course, there's other unstoppable people and liberating people and dreamers out there. But the specific combination of how God's named me is one of one. And that means I've got something that nobody else has. Now, some days I believe that and some days I don't. And that's the doing the inner work. Our inner universe, as that expands, that's going to impact my outer universe. As we dive inward and do some course correction, have the deepest places spoken to us, now the deepest dreams can come out. But my hope for you would be that you would not, or for anybody that says, hey, dreams have been crushed. Those dreams or that hopelessness, that despair wouldn't last, but that there would be hope.
Amen.
Begins with hope and allowing that in. But that's a risk. Allow hope back in.
Absolutely. And that resonates on a very deep level with me. The song my favorite song in the last 2 years, and I've been to this concert tour twice already. It's NF, and his track is Hope. And I can
really?
I can almost feel that with some of my learning is that the dream is kind of the aim, but hope is the fuel. And I think I'm renewing my aim in this season, and I think people like you and other people, it's crazy. I just encounter so much every week and every day, and I feel like God's sharpening things and bringing in things into more focus. Like I say on the show, radical focus. But it's fueled by courage. But I even will go deeper as you say this. I think courage is fueled by hope. So what you just said resonates. That might be another layer that I need to even explore deeper on this show and this podcast as I meet people, because I think without the hope, the courage doesn't exist either. But I'm most interested too, as I prepared for your interview, you've shared with me your morning ritual. And even before we started the interview, we opened up with that and how you did something unique this morning. But you also said something on our first call that you're planning to do this 1,000 times in a year, which I thought was like, yes, I love this type of aim. And you're practicing silence and solitude. I practice it. I'm not very good at it yet. I do hike, which is where I find it. But then you're praying psalms, you're surrendering in prayer. And I'm just interested, what role do these practices play in your life now? And how can someone else maybe join this movement?
That's been another incredible journey this past year. I got exposed to a book called The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Someone recommended it to me at the beginning of last year. And it's to this day the best thing I've ever read. And I haven't read a lot of books on creativity specifically, but this book was an amazing way to unpack looking at life. The subtitle is A Way of Being. The Creative Act, A Way of Being. It's talking about a lifestyle. And in it, he starts to unpack this idea that there's a larger story at play. And he keeps referring to the source, going back to the source. And that's where creativity comes from. He talks about this idea that, have you ever thought of something and then you didn't take action on whatever that was? And shortly after, you hear about somebody else that took action on the same thing you had been thinking about.
Yeah.
He describes that as, that's because the idea's time had come.
Wow.
It was going to happen no matter what. It's just a matter of who's going to take action on it. And that's because it was tied to the source, and that there's a larger story at play with a thread, a common thread that's moving all the way through. And a big part of this idea is then becoming aware of the source. And I believe who he's referencing is God. He's the maker of the universe is who he's referring to. And the idea of awareness and starting to pay more attention to what's happening around us. So I said, okay, I'm going to start to practice this, the idea of becoming a little bit more aware. So where it led me is anytime someone would say something that I'd heard somewhere else within a previous conversation, I would want to look into it more rather than just saying, oh, it's a coincidence. I would start to actually look into this. Somebody mentioned the name Comer. Never heard of the guy in a conversation. And then a week later, I'm at my friend's house. We're doing a house flip up in Seattle with him. And I'm at his house and I see the guy Comer in his bookshelf. And I pull the book and I open the book and the title is fascinating. The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. What a title. But that's not what captured me. I opened the book and there's a verse in there. And it's Matthew 11:28-30. It's the easy yoke passage. And instantly I knew I have to read this book. My oldest child is a daughter. We named her Grace Wilder. And because of something that was very meaningful to me, which was this exact verse in the Message translation, which was written in the town that we used to live in Montana by a guy named Eugene Peterson.
Yeah.
Wrote about the unforced rhythms of grace, a whole new way of living.
Yes.
And I had lost sight of it. Looking at that verse in this book, I knew I had lost sight of the unforced rhythms of grace, a way of living freely and lightly. And this, the book started to unpack this for me, that if culture is a stream, and we are in that stream, it has a current. It's going somewhere. And unless I'm deliberate and intentional about going upstream, I will be going with the stream.
Yes.
Which, of course, begs the question, what stream am I in? What culture am I in? Well, I live in America. I'm largely influenced by American culture, which is a very capitalistic culture, the most capitalistic on earth. Maybe the most driven place on earth. So many opportunities, but also the place where people take the least amount of vacation. There's a lot of vacation time goes unused here in this country because people are so driven, so ambitious. And I think I got caught up in the rat race of serving money. Money wasn't serving me. I was serving money. I was making more money than I'd ever made and living off of those spoils and enjoying it, but living from a place where it wasn't serving the other master, that's the master of the universe. So it took me on this journey to discover a new way of living.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things he starts to unpack is just talking about an ancient way of living.
Come on.
This isn't new, an ancient
No.
way, something that's baked into the way the universe was created.
Yeah.
The idea that, hey, the week is 7 days, and one of those days is set aside to be for rest.
Yeah.
The last time that we try to change that as societies in the world was during the French Revolution. They tried to change it to a 10-day work week.
Really?
And it caused disarray, disorder, and they couldn't make it work. They changed it back to 7 days.
That's crazy. I never knew that. I'll have to look that up.
And it's because the line that was haunting from the book is that if you go against the grain of the universe, you're going to get splinters.
Oh.
Changing from a 7-day to a 10-day work week on the calendar was going against the grain of the universe. And I started to recognize things in my life where I was going against the grain of the way things were set up. So that took me on this journey of ancient practices, modeling my life around somebody that's already lived this life, and it introduced a whole new way of living that was rooted in the ancient practices, in the cornerstones of the way the world was laid out from the very beginning. And that was God himself in human form.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus.
Come on.
And one of the things that Jesus kept doing is they kept looking for him. He kept disappearing.
Yeah.
Where is he? He's gone again. They kept looking for him.
That's awesome.
And it talks about this idea that he kept going to be on his own with his dad. He went to go be on his own.
And it often
in
was
solitude.
Mountains. I love mountains. There's something about
Often in the outdoors.
Yeah.
And so I started to get reintroduced to a way of living my life, because after Jesus left the planet and said, it's better that I leave because I'm going to send my spirit, there was a whole movement of people that set up their life around these practices, these ancient practices. And one of the core ones that I had never really practiced in my life was the idea of being alone and in silence, not just going to be alone and addressing God, but shutting up, not saying a thing, just being. And so I introduced a practice as which has become probably the core practice. And I've started to believe that this may be actually where the most transformation happens, when I don't do anything, as I show up and I'm quiet, on my own, alone.
Wow.
And that's the first thing I now do as a part of my morning practice. I introduced this and I started to call it my morning ritual. Ritual because it's sacred. I've just started to recognize this isn't a routine. This truly is sacred and essential to living, because this will shape the rest of my day and can help create other sacred moments.
Yeah.
Can create restful living. The invitation from Jesus is that I started to experience. I've just started to explore and started to accept his invitation. Come to me and I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. I'll show you how to do it. The idea of both walking with God and also working with God. But how to have a real rest. And silence and solitude has become a key piece of that. So what does it look like for me? It practically looks like I want to do it outdoors. I don't want to do it inside. Now, I live in a pretty comfortable place. I live in California where it's year round. It's really nice. Now, we had rainstorms here this last week, and it was amazing to go out in the rain.
Wow.
And be in the rain. When I was in Canada over Christmas, it was getting cold, 20 below. And I couldn't last as long, but I bundled up and go just spend 5 minutes outside to be in silence and solitude. And I was introduced to this idea of just welcoming, basically announcing my presence, because God is present. I'm just announcing my presence and basically saying, I'm accepting your invitation. You're always here. Now I'm announcing I'm here. And that's what I'll say. I'm here. Come, Holy Spirit.
Wow.
And then I wait. That's the core practice that's, I believe, changed my morning ritual, which is the summation of my rhythm. So that's one of my core rhythms is silence and solitude.
I love that.
Then it moves into reading. So inputs, I changed my inputs dramatically, where I said what my input, what I'm allowing is we're going to really change my output. And I started to take that seriously. So the first thing I want to be reading is this ancient book. and I started reading the Bible in a new way and consistently, more regular in a way that I haven't in a very long time. And a part of it would be reading about communication, about prayers.
Yeah.
There's a whole book of people communicating with God.
Yeah.
And so that led then to the idea, what I grew up in, it seems like what a lot of people in Western evangelical tradition is spontaneous prayer, where whatever comes to mind, we pray, which is one form. But there's other forms. The idea of precept or liturgical, and here's a whole book of this. And so incorporating both spontaneous and preset prayers. And where this really then started to take off for me was I started praying the same psalm every day. I've been praying the same psalm since September last year.
And which psalm is it again? You mentioned that to me.
Psalm 25. My head is high, God, held high. I'm looking to you, God. No hangdog skulking for me is how it starts off.
Yeah.
In the Message translation, because it's so raw. The words are so different. And so I started to do that, but then I started to have these pre-written prayers I was coming across. I'd be praying aspects of these and using some of these to pray daily. And over the course of the year, something started to take shape where I kept editing this or adding this. And one day I wrote out this thing where I'm like, whoa, this is speaking and voicing, giving voice to what I believe is one of my deepest desires. And going into this new year, I was praying this once per day, and I had this impression. I was like, this is going to be a winning habit I'm going to adopt for the year. I want to speak this over myself forcefully, to forcefully speak this over myself 1,000 times this year, 3 times per day, morning, noon, and night. And if this gets answered, I will be living from that place of identity, because what's central as a part of that is who I believe God's spoken over me, and asking God to help me live from that place, to untangle me from the doubt that prevents me from living out my true identity as the unstoppable, liberating dreamer.
Wow, Benji, I have a lot to think about there, and it weaves so much, and it's mind-boggling to me that our paths crossed, right? And I think what you're sharing with me, I'm propelled in a way, if that makes sense, because we don't talk every week. You do text me after the arena call, and we kind of connect, but I can say even from us becoming brothers in a way, and friends digitally, even for that matter. I'm going to see you next month, but. But I just want to, maybe you can speak into this, because this is probably what you're experiencing in these times now. Is I feel like there's a connection. Like, it's weird because some of the things you just shared, and you even as of recent, I'm doing too. Like, I shared with you before the call, like, I don't know what it is, but the last 2 weeks I'm doing some sort of like meditative prayer. And I grew up in the Pentecostal stream and I think there was elements of that, right? But even the liturgical, I'm drawn to liturgical prayer too. And my wife's family's Catholic, and I'm beginning to admire Catholic writings. And you mentioned an author, and I bought his book, Richard Rohr, and I'm like, this dude is speaking to my soul. And it's just been a journey. And so that's when I want to encourage everyone listening, is that, and I thought this as he was speaking, people are going to hear what you just said and said, well, I can never do that. I don't know how this guy's pretty radical. He's traveled everywhere, but I felt that way a few months ago, and you just have to take the breakthroughs in stride. And you mentioned deeper work, and those that listening and those that follow this show now, this is going to be deeper work, and I think that's what's so exciting to me. And I'll even share to those listening in our audience, like, I have an aim of 100 episodes before I even consider stopping, and I don't know what that is. It's very ambitious, because I know most people, even my wife's in the podcast space and a lot of marketing, and like most people do 6 or 7 podcasts and they give up. It just becomes something like, wow, but 100. And so that's it. We got to have radical aim. And I just love your 1,000. So let's continue this conversation, because I have a few more questions that I was so excited about. And one of them was, you mentioned too, there are 3 questions that bring about spiritual alignment for you. Can you unpack those 3 questions and what they mean? I have them written too, if you need Any
I
help?
was exposed to these questions by a friend of mine in Canada, Josh. And Josh said, I just would just submit these questions to you. They could be really helpful in guiding this coming year.
Okay.
And they really lined up with what was happening already. That's the beautiful part about this. Again, that there's a bigger story that's happening.
Always
It's not by chance that you and me are talking. It's not by chance that Josh brought a question that was in line with where my life was this whole year, of things that I've been reading and discussing, because there's a much bigger story that's happening. There's this thread, and the colliding of each other's lives just lets us see this bigger story that's happening, that has become so exciting to come be a part of, and how we can influence each other and how God uses us. So the first question he asked for us to consider is, God, what do you want me to eliminate to make space for you? The idea of what not to add. We're doing enough stuff. Less. Where can I make way? What do I need to remove in order to make space for God? Our lives are very full. And the word busy has become a dirty word for me, because busyness, that's what largely keeps us from engaging with the deepest parts of ourselves, which leads to God. And we have to make space. And in the attention economy that we live in, more than ever, it seems like the most in history, there's more things trying to get our attention than at any time since the creation of this planet. And it's in that environment, if we choose to place our attention on the Creator, I believe that will have profound consequences. That will truly shape who we become. And so, as a part of that question, what do I want to make space is, what do I want to eliminate to make space for God? That was a very profound question for me to consider. And a part of that for me is surrender. So I have a daily surrendering prayer that I've come across that someone said to me, another person, Simon, that I meet with, that's from a British guy from Taiwan, sent me this beautiful, beautiful prayer of surrender, I think largely based on the AA model. And it goes like this: welcome, welcome, welcome. I welcome everything that comes to me in this moment, because I know it is for my healing. I welcome all thoughts, feelings, emotions, persons, situations, and conditions. I let go of my desire for security. I let go of my desire for affection. I let go of my desire for control.
Ooh.
I let go of my desire to change any situation, person, condition, or myself. I open to the love and presence of God and the healing action and grace within.
Wow. Man, I felt that even as you just said it. Like I felt my spirit even taking that in for a moment. Because that letting go is probably half the battle. Like I as you listed them, the one you saw me react to was power, like control, like even in my business coaching, like you're high power and high recognition. And those are some dials you got to turn down. And that's one of the hardest things.
I think that's a part of this new way of living, a surrendered life. And as the life gets surrendered, then God can use these desires and wants to use ambition. The way I've heard it put recently is we need more ambitious people. People that are more ambitious, but ambitious in a way that we aren't seeing in the world, to serve more people, to influence more people in greater service. That our dreams are too small.
That's right.
And having greater ambition, but doing that from a place of surrender. And that's a place of rest.
Yeah.
reminding myself every day, I'm not in control.
Yeah.
I may think that at times or may feel that way sometimes, but that's not the reality. I certainly have a responsibility, and there's agency and there's choice with what I choose. But ultimately, I'm not in control.
That's crazy.
And reminding myself with that to start the day. That's one of my opening prayers as I start to communicate with God. That's one of the key pieces in communicating with Him.
Yeah.
Is that.
And you mentioned the first question is, what do I want to eliminate to make space? I know there's two more. Do you want to unpack those?
Well, of course, that begs the question then, if I'm going to make space for God, what do you want to give me in exchange?
Ooh, that's a good one.
So as I'm eliminating, I'm making
Yeah.
space. Now God's going to come in. What does He want to come in with? And
That's
asking
beautiful.
Him, what do you want to give me in exchange? And then the third question being a very personal question. And that is, God, who do you want to be for me this year?
Wow.
Who do you want to be for me in this stage of my life?
So you're asking God, unpack this for me, because I'm trying to connect it, because I think it's different than what I would have typically heard, right? So you're asking God, who do you want? Yeah, say it again. Explain it to me. I'm trying to connect.
If I'm asking God, I'm asking him directly, saying, God, who do you want to be for me this year?
Wow.
Not who do I
Not
want God to be for me.
projection. It's almost like that's what I was probably getting at, and that's why I'm hung. I think we project things on God. Like we're a freaking projector, and we just put up the light and whatever we think He is. But you're asking Him who He really is and who He wants to be in your life.
Rather than saying, hey, this is my desire for who I want you to be for me, okay, I'm asking Him, what's your desire, God?
Oh, wow.
For who you want to be for me.
And then you want to align that, your life, and you receive it. Yeah, that opens up, and I think I hear in both of those themes what you said earlier is letting go, and now you're even letting go of your own image of who God is because of your circumstances, experiences in life.
I think that's where it gets really personal. This is where He can really dive into the deepest places of ourselves, of who He wants us to be for in this point in life.
And I think that's what you're saying, and I'm excited about this because I was excited when you told me to ask God for my name, but now you gave me another question to explore. Like, I don't think I've asked God who He wants to be for me right now. That one hit a wounded place. That's what Calvin, another guy, had on there. I love taking my guest words. You've given me so much definition, even what you've shared. But Calvin, who I had on the podcast earlier, he just describes all of the places that we need healing as wounded places. And he had a guy that he's been ministering to when his wife and them were having a discussion. He was able to joke, "Hey, that hit a wounded place, and I'm gonna go and deal with that." Like he walks away, and I think that's so beautiful. And I think even our discussion, there are times when I'm listening, and I'm sure there are people listening feeling the same way. Like that hit something, and I think I've become more sensitive to that, and that might be something you can share too, and how you do it. I can't tell you. There's music I'm listening to now in this season. There are podcasts that I've listened to, just even with the aim to like become a better podcast host while I'm listening to other podcasts and other voices. And there are thoughts, and I'm on walks with my dog, and I'm like saying out loud, like, "Oh my gosh!" Like it just penetrates. So I think that's a sensitivity that's developing. How have you developed that?
To me, that sounds like you're making space.
Oh.
That's what it makes me think of. The idea that God's always there. It's like He's always at the door, and it's like, am I going to open it and let Him in? Make space for Him. And that's why I think that first question can be so helpful, because thinking through both what I think I need to eliminate, but then ask God also, because He can help me see things that I need to eliminate. The way I heard it put recently is, if God answered everything that you asked Him or asked of Him, both in this last week, would your life or anybody else's life dramatically change?
Golly.
What kind of things are we talking to Him about? What am I asking Him for? What am I asking of Him? And what kind of dialogue am I having? And I think that is what He's really after. I've
really appreciated your take on this, because I do have on the business side, I'll share this transparently because this actually ministers to me greatly, and it might be breakthroughs for someone else too. So I'll share it. On Monday this week, or Tuesday morning was tough. My business coach comes in with like this plan, and we're dealing with this other book called The Immunity to Change right here. And I know it's crazy. It's deep. It's like, look how thick that thing is. I'm reading it. And he's like wanting to put the plan in place, and he's challenging me and all these things. And then he's basically telling me to stop reading books. And he literally is. Now he's telling me to focus on business, right? And I told my wife too, I was like, he just thinks I'm not doing enough for the business. He's like, why aren't you working harder and earning more and developing more? And I'm like, dude, you don't even know half the stuff we do in this thing. And so I was kind of pushing back. And that's what I do sometimes with my coaching. I don't mind wrestling with it. And then I leave and like, shoot, he's right. But he's been telling me like to stop listening to all these voices. And he kind of has made a comment a few times that I have too many voices, that I rely on. And I love Owen McManus. And now I get to hear him every Monday. It's like, that's one. He's like, you can keep Owen. Like I told him, I can't get rid of this guy. And I can't get rid of the arena, obviously. And I think that's what God's brought into my life. I have a constant, steady community where I can explore big ideas. But if you know me, man, I'm reading all sorts of things. I got into crazy stuff too that makes no sense, probably invokes fear, aliens and all sorts of stuff was down the rabbit holes the last few months. But I'm coming back to this to say, I think you're right. I think hearing what you said today, he's right in a practical sense for business, but more importantly, in a practical sense for my spiritual life, I need to stop listening to all these voices and probably listen to the one. Make space for the one.
And I think that's a part of the invitation.
Yeah.
It talks about this idea. Are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out of religion? Come to me and I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. That's the invitation that I have not accepted. And I'm only starting to accept. Working with God. What would that look like? So the words for the year for me this year that came to me was this idea of not capitalizing, but restfully capitalizing. That's how I start my work day, not my personal day. My work day starts with that question. How do I restfully capitalize today?
Wow. I received that.
And I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I think God wants to show me how to do it. He wants to work with me.
Yeah.
He wants to show me how to work.
And this is
in business.
Unbelievably threading right here, because as we land the plane of this show, I always ask a previous guest, a guest that I've had on, to ask a question to the next guest. And no one knows this because I haven't released the other episode that I recorded last week. But get this is going to probably be pretty surprising to you. The gentleman I had on last week, his name is Adam Cruz. And guess what his entire core message is? The healed hustle. And
the
everything
healed hustle.
Yeah, isn't that beautiful? Because he said, and it resonates with something you said earlier, hustle's not bad. It's only bad when it's not healed. And I can't tell you, again, Adam came into our lives through my wife's community group called Brand Builders. She's up in Tennessee. She meets him, has an immediate connection saying, you've got to talk to my husband. Like, you two are just going to be the best of friends. And so, me in my normal sense would be like, whatever, Les, this guy's like random. He's not going to have time talking to me. He's writing books, he's doing stuff. But Leslie put an email, like my wife's so activist. She's like, she puts an email chain, and within a matter of 1 or 2 emails, the guy's on my podcast the next few days, and we're having the best of time. But here's the question that he leaves for you. And he said it this way: how do you regularly touch the grass? And I'm sure you can already know what that means, but to pack it the way Adam was just saying is that he has a natural preserve near his home that he takes walks, and it's not about ambition. It's about reminding himself how God is faithful. So Benji, how do you do that regularly? Yeah.
To me, it's I have to get outside, and I want to do that the first thing I do. To the extent even that I go take a piss outside. I go outside. That's the first thing I do is I go outside, and I want to be outside. It's done something for me of being in the outdoors first thing in the morning. And that's where my morning ritual takes place, is in the morning outside.
Wow.
And there's the thing that I tried this morning that I was introduced to, because what I have been looking for as I just go to be, and I'm usually out there barefoot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. You're literally touching the grass.
Yes, I'm often barefoot.
You do have grass in Santa Barbara, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I got grass. Yeah, it's not the prettiest of grass. Yeah. But as I'm out there, I'm looking for signs physically of to become aware of God's presence. I've started to look for the wind, because it talks about this in the Bible.
Awesome.
And I'm always looking for wind. So like today, it's pretty windy out. It was this morning. And to me, right away, what it makes me think about, Spirit of God. Spirit of God, He's here. He's been here all along, but I'm reminded of that. And so that's often what I look for. But a lot of the mornings, it's completely still. There's nothing. At 5:30 in the morning is often nothing. There's maybe a little bit of traffic or something I'll hear from the freeway, but it's pretty quiet. And I was exposed to this idea that this morning I finally tried out, in the idea of not only God being represented by wind, but by a flame. And so this morning I lit a candle and took the candle with me to represent God's Spirit, and having that candle sit right next to me as I sat outside to be with God.
I like it.
And those are my two things as I think through the idea of a flame or wind, and the candle may stick. That may be something I can continue to incorporate.
Definitely. I might give it a shot too. I have a candle right on my desk as we talk. I can just light this baby.
There we go.
There's something about it. I did that too recently. You're right about the flame. There's something, and I think that's ancient, right? Fire. Like when I go camping, I can't tell you, the conversations you have around a campfire are just automatically deeper. And I find that with my kids, and we didn't get to talk about that. We'll have you back, because I know you're a family guy. I had other questions, and we'll dive into family and practical marriage and kids and parents. That would be an incredible conversation, as we're both in the midst of that. But Benji, this is incredible. So again, Adam left that question for you. Can you think of a question for the next guest? What question would you like to ask them?
I believe it's the first question we talked about.
Yeah.
How will you make space? What will you eliminate to make space for God?
Wow.
What will you eliminate to make space for God?
That's going to be fun to ask. And it's so exciting and you know what? I don't even know who the next guest is. I have to look at my calendar, but it's just exciting it does that for me as the podcast host. And I hope it does it for you listening, because then you get to be like, ooh, I can't wait for the next person to get answered and ask that question. So that's exciting. Benji, where can people find you, connect with you, and even maybe even work with you on a coaching level? How can they connect with you?
Yeah. So my website's getting reworked right now, but it's wilderpursuits.com. That's a great place to find me. I'm obviously on LinkedIn.
It's Wilder with a Y as well, right?
With a Y. Yeah.
That's cool.
Same as the spelling of my daughter, Grace Wilder. Okay. Wilder Pursuits. Yeah.
I'm in. I can't wait to see that. That's going to be
Stop playing it safe.
Wilderpursuits.com.
Stop playing it safe and go chase your dreams.
Come on. Well, you've helped me for sure, and I'm sure those listening. This is just the beginning of, I think this ministry is going to go so high in what God's going to use through you. And I can't wait to be a part of it too, brother. You got me in. I'm sold. Whatever you need. And I just want to thank you again for sharing your story, your heart. If today's conversation resonated with you, I would ask that you would share it with a friend who needs to hear it. I send podcasts to people all the time, and now I'm excited to have one that can be shared as well. And just remember, courage. And now you know as well as the questions, the deeper work and the courage and the hope. It fuels radical focus, and wisdom cuts through the lies. Until next time, we'll see you on the Brave Wisdom Podcast.
Thanks for having me.